Whitetail here, and we're moving on to our next episode on our how-to series on arrows. Basically, what we started out with last episode was one of our brand new Acu-Carbon match grade, thousandth of an inch end-to-end, 300 spine Easton arrow. This arrow tested out pretty well. Last episode, if you remember, we did the paper tune, bare shaft, and you see there's still no fletching on there. So we're staying with not putting fletching on until a little bit later, because what we want to go through is checking our straightness with and without a point. Then we want to weigh our arrows, check to make sure that they're all within a grain or two of each other. There's always going to be some slight variation, and I'm going to show you some of the pieces I did. Now you'll notice on this arrow I have 2 pieces of painter tape on it, and basically that's for a process that some people do and some people don't do, called cresting. And cresting is basically marking an arrow so you know that it's yours. Totally decorative. Depending on what paint and what you do, it can add just a couple of grains to your arrow, but nothing that's really going to throw it off, as long as you have them all done similarly. So first off, I'm going to show you the equipment that I'm going to be using today. A couple of useful tools that aren't too expensive, that most people can afford, just to do some basic checking. And the first of which is our Pine Ridge arrow spinner. Now this arrow spinner is mostly plastic. It's very light, so you can fit it in your bag, and you can also tear it down pretty easily. It has 2 pegs on the bottom that fit into a piece like this. Now there's an inside place to place an arrow, and there's a top part to place an arrow. Now I know there's some really special terms for those, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to keep it simple and straight to the point. There's a matching part on the other end, and all you do, whether you put it together or take it down, is these pegs are 2-part. They plug into each other, male and female end, and then we go ahead, place the 2 pegs into the one end, and then simply do the same thing on the other end. What this lets us do is, once we place our arrow on and we put her on a table, a nice level surface as much as possible, and basically we're going to give that arrow a spin. Now that won't really count for much right now because of course it's not level, but this is a good way to check your arrows bare shafted, with fletching, with broadheads, with field tips, just to make sure everything is seated right, to make sure my arrows were cut properly. That's something I want to get into next year, get my own arrow saw, but I let the shop do it for right now because they know what they're doing. But it is another process that I intend to learn about and get into next year, following this season. The next piece of equipment we're going to be using is the Superior Balance Arrow Scale. Now there are many brands out there. Some people will go as far as going ultra cheap and going with a food scale. However, this scale measures in grains only. Very important, because whether we're shooting or whether we're firing arrows, we want to make sure that we get grains. There's a very easy way to calibrate this, and included in the package, and I have it out right now. So this is the box and the interior, and basically you calibrate it with a piece of metal. This one is 1,000 grains, and basically it's just a small cylinder, and when you first get your scale out of the box, you put your batteries in, set this on top, and you turn your scale on. You'll set the 1,000 grain piece of metal on top and make sure it weighs 1,000 grains. That's how you calibrate your scale. That 1,000 grains, as long as you don't damage it or cut it, will be 1,000 grains no matter what. It's fairly dense, so it resists scratches and marks, which I did once when I first pulled it out of the package. So there's no issues there. Everything is perfectly clean and clear. Next thing is actually the scale. And what we'll do is, the scale, relatively small device, It comes closed like this. There is a tab on front, but I have it open already, and this is your scale. I left the protective plastic on there just for kicks because it doesn't hurt anything and it protects my sight. And basically all we do is we hit, there's an on off button, and we go ahead and we set our piece of metal on first that weighs 1,000 grains, and then we go ahead and we double check that to make sure it is true. Once it's true, then we can begin our weighing process. Nextly, we're going to go ahead and turn it off, and because we're going to set a small piece on here, and that is our device that allows us to set round objects on a flat surface. Again, I'm sure this has a very technical name, but we're going to call it our little red plastic weigher. And what we do with this is, this allows us to set our arrow in this channel, which you see is cut. It's about probably 1/4 of an inch deep cylinder. You can place casings for firearms. You can place the actual sabots that go in, and you can also put your arrows in there. So what we'll do is we'll turn our machine off, our scale, and we'll place this on, and then we'll turn it on. That way we start out with 0 with this piece on there. So I'm going to go into the next part of the process and actually show you what we do with this. And let's see what we got, and we'll check. Now we have our arrow. As you can see here, it's already been checked off. We've made sure we've inspected the arrow after shooting to make sure there's no issues with it, since it's a brand new arrow. The next thing we want to do is double check to make sure there are no gaps here where it was cut, and everything's looking pretty good. Now these were done at the shop. I did not do these at home. If you do them at home, you want to make sure that everything is level before you put your insert in at the end. But everything is glued. They check this, and we know we're good. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to insert our field point that we just shot with. Again, just double checking for fitment and making sure there's no issues. Next, before we actually spin our arrows, I have a, of course, homemade table here that I created for my hunting room, and we want to make sure this is level. You want to make sure your arrow spinner is not going to roll one way or the other, so we know we have a proper spin and a good level surface to work on. And we're simply going to place our arrow in, not too far forward, because of course we can see it's going to fall forward. So all we're going to do is get a good look at it and give it a good spin. Now what we're looking for, I'll back this up a little bit so I can focus the camera a little bit closer, and we're keeping an eye on the actual field point here. Okay, so let's take a look, and there is no wobble as that arrow spins at all. That's exactly what we're looking for. And you see it does travel forward a little bit, but that's okay. Arrows. But before that, another optional step that you can do, and we'll go ahead and get into it, is we'll go ahead and remove our field point. And like I said, if you want to, if you don't have your broadhead selected yet, that's okay. You can just do field points and you can test with broadheads later. I have one of my DRT single bevels. This is a 150 and 175 grain. What couldn't see before was, let me show you the weight, and here you can see this part right here. Basically this is your extra 25 grains right here. So we'll make sure that this is snug up against the actual broadhead the whole way up the ferrule, and we'll go ahead and insert that into our arrow, and we'll do the same thing again. Everything's looking good. We're snug, we're tight. Want to make sure we take care not to cut ourselves, and we'll give it a spin here, and we're looking for a good smooth spin, which we have. This time I'll do it in a close-up. I'll actually get a really good look at the broadhead. There's no bounces or anything there, so we're good to go with our arrow spinning portion. And like I said, I'm not going to bore you with taking you through all 6 of my arrows to make sure they're all checked. I'll do them separately by myself off camera. Okay, moving forward, like I said before, we have our scale set up. We have our devices not turned on quite yet, but we're going to go ahead and set our red plastic piece on here. Most scales from an outdoor shop or a hunting shop are going to come with this piece when they have the set. So we want to make sure we have that centered on there. We're going to go ahead and hit our power button, and we'll take a look and see what we have. We're going to go ahead and set our arrow on. Now sometimes you have to play with this a little bit to see where you're at. This is without any field tip or broadhead on it. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at it, and we're looking at about 322 grains. And for you OCD people out there like me, when it comes to planning out your setup, we're going to go ahead and mark that down just on a piece of scrap paper here. I always keep a notepad with my stuff so I know what I have done when I'm looking at these. And on a small piece of masking tape, which you do see the painter's tape is on there, I'll go ahead and mark a number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on the whole way through, and I'll list all of my weights for each arrow just to see how close we are. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull it off, and our scale says 0 because we have our small piece of plastic on there already when we weighed our when we turned our scale on for the power. Next, I'm going to go ahead and lay this on. Now, of course, because your front is center, and there almost went my camera rig, your front of center is going to change the balance point of this arrow. So, moving it forward, we're going ahead and we're going to take a look at this. And as it stands with a 175 grain field point, we went up to 496 grains. Now mind you, this is without any fletching on the arrow. We're going to go through fletching at a later point and probably another episode because we don't want to make this one too incredibly long. I'll go ahead and after this I will remove the field point and I'll reweigh with my broadhead to make sure everything matches up. Now, of course, in addition, I'm also going to be adding my cresting. It's just an extra thing that I wanted to do, and I will show you. I have another arrow that is crested already, and they were weighed earlier today. So basically what we have, I'll do this nice and slow for the camera, but we have a pattern that I put together, and it has a like a maroon color, and I taped off either end where the painter's tape was, just like on the other arrow, and left the middle blank, so that's just the black carbon, and I went with 3 copper stripes and did copper stripe in between the red and on the ends as well. So that's just a personal touch that I added. I wanted to do that this year, and I think it adds just a little bit of personality to your arrow if you choose to do it. I go ahead and once I paint those, they are sealed, and that's just something that I know no matter where I go. If I'm shooting target or 3D range somewhere, I know which ones are mine. And like I said, that's going to add a couple grains, but we'll reweigh those as well afterward. Okay, so as you can see, we went through on our list and we said we put our weight down for an arrow with no fletching or point. Then we went ahead and added our weight with no fletching and a point, and our next weigh will be fletching with a point. Now those of you going ahead and adding on a lighted knock, this just adds an extra step for you, and you would just put an extra weight down. And like I said, you go through each arrow. The idea is you're looking for consistency, for your arrows, so you know they're within 5 or 10 grains of each other. They're going to fly straight, and you know they're going to act the same way every time. Ultimately, you know, something like cresting or going with a 3-fletch versus a 4-fletch could affect performance. In addition, there are others that like to try different broadheads. Some people like to use mechanicals. Other instances, they may use a fixed point broadhead. So those things are all going to affect arrow flight, but ultimately what we're looking for is the arrows that we've knocked on with one broadhead or another are all consistent and we maintain the same weight. Because just like bowling, this is all about consistency. There are 100 different things that could change how your shot flies. So we're just trying to make every attempt to make sure that we go ahead and take care of things the way they need to be taken care of. Make sure you track your stuff, and when you try a different arrow, you want to go through this whole process again. You don't want to just slap an arrow in, go ahead and shoot, because when the heat of the moment hits, like we saw in one of Taylor's videos where he was hunting from a tree stand, that little bit of bounce, that deep breath that went too late, that shot that got pulled a little bit low can very easily happen. And it doesn't matter if it's 10 yards, 20 yards, or even 30 yards. That small bounce, that small step, that small misway could affect you being successful in your hunting season. So I'm going to end this video and we'll move on to our next episode coming soon, in which I'll be going ahead and showing my preparation and my process for fletching our arrows. We're also going to do a wrap on the end, and I'll explain all that in the next episode. But till then, stay hydrated.